Good day everyone, mabuhay! Today we will be discussing the continuation of the generations of computers, particularly the third and fourth generations. For introduction, this presentation covers the third and fourth generations of computers, which was a period when computing evolved from institutional machines to personal computers. What this means is that computers were no longer limited to large institutions, organizations, or businesses. As technology improved, computers become more practical and eventually become available for personal use. And these generations also brought major gains in size, speed, efficiency, and accessibility. Now, in terms of size, computers become smaller. And in terms of speed, they could process information much faster. They also become more efficient and reliable while becoming more accessible and affordable to a greater number of people. Now, please bear with us as my group mates will discuss the major developments and innovations that happened during the third and fourth generations of computers. Thank you so much.
Good day everyone, I am Joshua B. Magsayo. Today I am going to discuss the third generation of computers which took place during the 1960s to 1970s. Before I explain the characteristics, let me first give a short background. The third generation of computers was an important stage in the history of computers because this was the time when computers became smaller, faster, more affordable, and more reliable. The biggest improvement during this generation was the use of integrated circuits. Because of this technology, computers no longer needed as many large electronic components as the computers from the previous generation. So first is the main electronic component, integrated circuits. The first important characteristic is the integrated circuit or IC. An integrated circuit is a small electron chip that contains many electronic components such as transistor in a single unit. In the second generation, computer mainly use individual transistors, but during the third generation, many transistors and other components could be placed together inside a small integrated circuit. Because of ICs, computers become smaller, faster, more efficient, and more reliable. So we can see that integrated circuits were one of the major reasons why computer technology developed rapidly during this period. So that number 2 is memory and storage. The second characteristic is memory and storage. Third generation computers commonly use magnetic core memory for their main memory. They also use magnetic tape and magnetic disk for storing larger amount of information. Magnetic tape was useful for storing data for later use, while magnetic disk allowed user to store and access information more conveniently. Compared with earlier computers, these storage technologies help computers handle more information and improve the way data was stored and retrieved. So number 3 is programming languages. The third characteristic is the development and use of high-level programming languages. During this generation, programmers used languages such as Fortran or FORTRAN, BASIC, COBOL, Pascal, and C. High-level programming languages were easier for humans to understand compared with machine language. For example, instead of writing complicated machine instruction using only numbers or code. Programmers could use word and command that were closer to human language. This made programming easier, faster, and more accessible to programmers. This programming language also become useful in different areas. For example, COBOL was widely used for business applications, while FORTREN was commonly used for scientific and engineering calculations. And the number 4 is size of computers. Another important characteristic was the size of computers. Third generation computers were generally smaller than second generation computers. Some of these smaller computers were called mini computers. Although they were still large compared with today's laptops and smartphones, they were much more practical than the huge computer used during the first generation. Their smaller size also helped organizations such as business, school, and research institutions use computers more easily. Then the number 5 is speed and reliability. The next characteristic is speed and reliability. Third generation computers were much faster and more reliable than second generation computers. Because integrated circuits could contain many components in a small space, computers could process information and more efficiently. They could perform calculations and handle data much faster than earlier machines. And they were also more reliable because there were fewer individual components that could fail. This improvement was very important because computers were beginning to be used for more serious and complicated tasks. And the number 6 is input and output device. So, lastly, we have the input and output devices. Input devices are used to enter information into a computer, while output devices are used to receive the results. During the third generation, computers used devices such as keyboards, monitor, magnetic tape, and printers. The keyboard allowed user to enter commands and information. The monitor allowed users to see information and result on the screen. The printer was used to produce information on paper. Magnetic tape and magnetic disks were also important for storing and retrieving data. These devices made interacting with computers more convenient compared with the earlier generations. So to summarize, the third generation of computers from the 1960s to the 1970s was a major turning point in computer history. Its most important development was the introduction of integrated circuits or ICs. Because of IC technology, computers become smaller, faster, cheaper, and more reliability. They also use magnetic core memory, magnetic tape, and magnetic disk, while programming became easier through high-level languages such as the Fortran, BASIC, COBOL, Pascal, and C. Computers also began using more convenient devices such as keyboards, monitor, and printers. Overall, the third generation helped make computers more practical and accessible, and it prepared the way for the more advanced computers that we use today. So that's end of my report about the third generation of computers.
Good day everyone. Today I will be discussing some example of third generation computers. Before I explain the example, let me briefly explain what third generation computers are. The third generation computers were developed around the 1960s to early 1970s. Unlike the earlier generations that used vacuum tubes and transistors, third generation computers use integrated circuits or ICs This made computers small, faster, more reliable, and more efficient. Now, let's look at some important example. First is the IBM System 360, or also known as the IBM 360. IBM announced the System 360 on April 7, 1964. It was a very important development in computer history because it introduced a family of computers that could use the same basic architecture. In simple terms, IBM 360 allowed different models of computer to work with compatible software and system. This was very useful for businesses and organizations because they could choose different computers model depending on their needs. The IBM 360 also represented an important transition into a third generation of computers. Next is the IBM System 370, or simply IBM 370. The IBM 370 was an advanced successor to the IBM 360. It improved the performance and reliability of the previous system. It also provided better virtual memory support, which helped computers manage memory more efficiently. Because of these improvements, the IBM 370 became useful for large organizations and enterprises workloads. So we can think of the IBM 370 as an improved and more powerful version of the IBM 360. The third example is the PDP-11. The PDP-11 was a popular mini-computer development by Digital Equipment Corporation. Unlike very large mainframe computers, mini-computers were smaller and could be used by universities, laboratories, businesses, and other organizations. The PDP-11 became popular because it could be used for research, education, and business applications. It also played an important role in the development and use of computer systems during this period. Lastly, we have the UNIVAC 1108. The UNIVAC 1108 was a high-performance computer designed especially for scientific and institutional users. It was capable of handling complex calculation and large amount of information. Because of this, it was useful for scientific research and other demanding computing tasks. For conclusion, to summarize, the IBM 360, IBM 370, and PDP-11 and UNIVAC 1108 are examples of computers for the third generation. These computers were important because they showed how computer technology was becoming faster, more reliable, and more capable. The development of integrated circuits helped make this possible and eventually lead to the smaller and more powerful computers that we use today. That would be all for my discussion. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something about the example of third computers.
Good afternoon, everyone. My topic for this afternoon is about fourth generation of computers. First, main electronic component. The main technology used was VLSI, or Very Large Scale Integration. It allowed thousands of transistors to be placed on a single small chip. The microprocessor also placed the main processing function of a computer into one chip. This helped make personal computers possible. And the second, VLSI technology. VLSI allowed many electronic components to fit into a very small space. Because of this, computers became smaller and more affordable. It also improved computer performance and made personal computers practical for homes, schools, and business. And the third, memory system. Fourth generation computers use semiconductor memory such as RAM and ROM instead of older magnetic core memory. RAM allows the computer to temporarily store information while working, while ROM store information that remains even when the computer is turned off. This memory system provided faster access and better reliability.
Good day everyone, so today I will going to discuss the fourth generation memory system, particularly the two types of memory, which is the RAM and ROM. So first, let us talk about the RAM or the random access memory. So RAM is a computer temporary working memory. It stores the program and data that the computer is currently using. For example, when we open app or applications like Facebook, Google Chrome, Microsoft Word, or a game, the computer uses RAM to temporarily stores the information needed by those app or applications. RAM is also called volatile memory. So when we say volatile, it means the information stored in RAM is loose when the computer is turned off. So for example, we are typing documents and the computer is suddenly shut down before we save our works. So the unsaved information may be loose. So in simple words, RAM is used for temporary storage and running active program and data. Next is ROM or read-only memory. So unlike RAM, ROM is non-volatile. This means that the information stored in it remains even when the computer is turned off. ROM stores important instruction that helps the computers operate. It is commonly associated with firmware and system instructions, which helps hardware start and function properly. So if RAM is the computer temporary workspace, ROM can be compared to a permanent instructions guide. So now, what is the difference between the RAM and ROM? RAM is temporary and volatile, while ROM is non-volatile and keep its information even when the power is turned off. These two types of memory, which is the RAM and ROM, is very important part of the computer's memory system because the RAM helps the computers work with the programs and data quickly, while the ROMs or non-volatile memory keeps the important instructions needed by the computer. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. My name is Susan R. Oropo, and I am the 6th reporter from the Group 4. And ang akwang topic for today is fourth generation programming and performance. So after the discussion about the third generation, ato nang ipadayon sa fourth generation of computers. Ang fourth generation of computers kay known for having smaller, faster, cheaper, and more reliable computers. This was made possible mainly because of the development of the microprocessor and VLSI technology or very large-scale integration. In a simple words, ang VLSI technology allowed many electronic components to be placed or integrated into a very small chip. So instead nga dagko kayo ang computer and daghan og separate components, mas gamay na siya but at the same time, mas powerful and efficient. Now, let us proceed to the 4 points in our presentation. First is programming languages. Programming languages are used to give instructions to a computer. In a simple terms, mao ni siya ang language nga ginagamit sa programmers para mas masabtan bitaw sa computer kung unsa iyahang angay buhaton. Our slide gives example of high-level programming languages. And such example is the Python, C number, Java or Java, JavaScript, Rust, and Kotlin. Pero take note ha, dili pasabot nga kaniadto sa fourth generation gihimo tanan ning languages. Some of these languages were developed much later. They are examples of modern high-level programming languages that show how programming continued to develop as computer became more advanced. High-level languages are easier for humans to understand compared with the writing instructions directly in machine language or binary. For examples, in hospitality industry, naatay mga hotel reservation systems, billing systems, guest management systems, and inventory systems.
Those systems depend on software, and software is created using programming languages. So ang programming languages help make our computer systems useful and easier to operate. The second is the size and cost. During the fourth generation, computers became dramatically smaller, cheaper, and more efficient. Why? Because of technology like the microprocessor and VLSI, mas daghan kaayo ang mga components ang ma-fit into a smaller space. So computer nga previously very large could now become much smaller. And because they became smaller and easier to produce, they also became more affordable. Meaning, mas daghan na nga people ang maka-afford og computer. Dili na siya limited only to large companies, government offices, or research institutions. Even students, family, schools, and small businesses could start using personal computers. Mo po ni siya ang reason why we call this period part of the personal computer revolution. For example, sa hotel, instead nga handwritten tanan ang reservations and guest records, computers can now be used to organize and store that information. So, mas paspas and mas convenient ang work sa management, di ba? The third one is speed and reliability. Another important thing is improvement during the fourth generation was the speed and reliability. Compared with the third generation, computers became faster, more accurate, and more reliable. This was because of improvements in microprocessor and VLSI technology. Our slide also mentions higher clock speeds. Simply explained, clock speed refers to how fast the processor operates. So as a processor technology improved, computers became capable of processing instructions more quickly. For example, imagine a hotel receptionist nga kinahanglan mag-check og hundreds of reservation. If manual records lang, dugay jud kaayo pangitaon ang mga information, right? Pero with a computerized system, the receptionist can quickly check the guest name, reservation, room availability, and the other information. So, maka-help jud siya to less time, less effort, and more organized ang ilahang work, diba? However, computers are not perfect. Pwede gihapon na ay errors because of incorrect data, software problems, hardware problems, or even human mistakes. That's why proper maintenance and correct use of computer are still important. Lastly, we have input and output devices. So unsa maning input and output nga devices? Input devices are the devices that allow us to put information into the computer. Examples are the keyboard, mouse, trackpad, and scanners. For example, if the receptionist types the guest name using the keyboard, that is input. On the other hand, output devices are the devices that allow the computer to give information back to us. Example are the monitor and printer. For example, if the guest reservation appears on the monitor, that is output. And if the hotel prints a receipt or invoice, that is also output. So para dali ra nato ma-remember, input means information going into the computer, while the output means information coming out of the computer. So, to summarize my discussion, the fourth generation of computers brought major improvements in programming, size, cost, speed, reliability, and input and output input devices. Computers became smaller, faster, cheaper, and more accessible. And because of these improvements, computer became very useful, not only in homes, schools, but also in different businesses and industry. Especially sa hospitality industry, computers are very important in reservation, guest management, billing, inventory, communication, and many other hotel operation. So as a future hospitality professionals, important pud ni nga masabtan nato ang rules sa computer technology because it can help us to provide faster, more organized, and more efficient service to our guests. And that's all concludes my discussion about fourth generation programming and performance. Once again, I am Susan Aroropong, the sixth reporter from Group 4. Thank you so much everyone for listening.
Good day, everyone. Today I will discuss one of the important developments during the fourth generation of computers, which is computer networking. First, what is a network? A network is a group of two or more computer systems that are connected or linked together. These computers can communicate with each other and share information or resources. During the fourth generation, networking became an important development because computers were no longer limited to working independently. Instead, computers could be connected together, allowing users to send information, share data, and communicate with other computers. For example, when several computers in a school laboratory are connected to the same network, they can share files, printers, and other resources. This makes work faster and more convenient. Another important benefit of networking is that it enabled communication and data sharing between computers across different locations. This meant that information could be transferred from one computer to another, even when the computers were not in the same place. Because of these developments, computer networking helped create the foundation for the modern internet and distributed computing that we use today. Technologies such as email, websites, online communication, cloud services, and many other systems depend on computer networks. So, in simple terms, networking transformed computers from isolated tools into a globally connected infrastructure. Before networking, computers mostly worked independently, but with networking, computers could communicate, exchange information, and work together. That's all. Thank you.
Afternoon, everyone. So I'm the next reporter, Wesley Ortiz. So my topic is fourth generation. So fourth generation of computers from 1971 to present is defined by innovation of the Intel. This tiny chip put thousands of arts onto a single piece of silicon using very large scale integration. It made computers small, cheap, and fast enough for personal home and office use. So fourth generation example. So there are three examples. So the first one, IBM PC 1981. So USD 1500 open architecture machine that became an industry standard and brought computing to the measure. It could connect to a television, enabled user to process text and play games, streamline business operations, and evaluated computing into the mainstream. So, and the second one is Apple II 1977. So, designed by Steve Wozniak and first sold on June 10, 1977, the Apple II became one of the most recognizable and successful computers through the 1980s. It was the first computer in with the spread use in American secondary schools. And the third one is Apple Macintosh and Star 1000. So the Apple Macintosh pioneered the graphical users interface and made computing intuitive for everyday users. The STARS 1000 presented another landmark achievement of fourth generation system. So that's all of my topic. Thank you.
Hello, mabuhay once again everyone. Now to conclude, the third and fourth generations of computers brought significant changes to the development of computer technology. The third generation introduced integrated circuits or ICs. Instead of using many separate components, integrated circuits place several electronic components into a small chip. No? This made computers smaller, faster, more reliable, and more efficient. The fourth generation further advanced computing through VLSI technology and microprocessors. VLSI or Very Large Scale Integration allowed thousands or even millions of electronic components to be placed on a single chip. The microprocessor also made it possible to build smaller and more powerful computers. Because of these developments, personal computers become smaller, more affordable, and accessible to more people. Now, these generations help transform computers from large and expensive machines into smaller, faster, and more accessible devices that become part of our everyday life. That's all. Thank you so much.
That's all for our report. Thank you for listening.